When Eric Bischoff had a meeting with Ted Turner in early 1995, his idea was to pitch a licensing deal between WCW and a Chinese broadcasting company named Star TV, owned by Rupert Murdoch. Eric wanted to get the current WCW programming into other markets, seeing this as an opportunity to increase revenue. Ted, however, had a question. It wasn't regarding the Chinese expansion, it wasn't about Rupert Murdoch, it wasn't about WCW licensing. Ted Turner asked Eric Bischoff, "Eric, what do we need to do to become competitive with Vince?" Eric wasn't prepared for such a question, but he was smart enough to think on his feet and throw out an answer. The young executive said that WCW needed a weekday primetime TV slot in order to be competitive. No one expected Ted Turner to immediately turn to the president of TNT and tell him to give Eric a primetime TV slot on Monday nights against WWF's flagship weekly TV show, Monday Night Raw. Eric left the meeting thinking, what on earth am I going to do now? You have to remember that this was a huge gamble at the time. WCW had predominantly been on the Saturday night TV slot, and going up against Raw on Mondays would definitely have an effect on the wrestling landscape. Wrestlers and people in the business at the time thought that having two shows on a Monday night would seriously water down the weekly wrestling business. There were only so many fans tuning in on Mondays anyway, so essentially WCW would be taking a small portion of these Monday Night Raw viewers, which really wouldn't equal success. Yes, WCW would be taking viewers away from the WWF, but all that done was leave both shows with a small amount of overall viewership on the grand scheme of things. Or so everybody thought. WCW Monday Nitro really needed to have their own loyal fans. They needed to create more viewers, not just take away from the WWF. Eric Bischoff said, "It became really clear to me very early on that we needed to be different from the WWE. I couldn't try to be better than the WWE because they were too good at what they did. They've been around too long and they've got that loyal fan base. I sat down by myself and I made a list. They're taped, I'm going to be live. They're targeting a specific demographic, I'll target a different one. They're very animated and cartoonesque, I'm going to be very reality based." So I made that list, and I think that was the start of making Nitro a success, making it different. So how did the name Nitro come about? Many people believe that the show was called WCW Monday Nitro because it sounded like Monday Night Raw, but this isn't the case. TNT at the time showed action movies on Saturday nights, naming every Saturday night TNT Saturday Nitro. So the name WCW Monday Nitro was simply a way for the new wrestling show to fit into TNT's branding. Once the name was decided and Eric had an idea of how the show was going to play out, he attended press conferences to announce that World Championship Wrestling was going head to head with the World Wrestling Federation, not being afraid here to say that WCW was going to emerge victorious. The very first WCW show to go live on Monday nights happened on September 4th, 1995, a night where the competition, WWF Raw, was preempted in favour of the US Open. Eric Bischoff and WCW had the whole night to themselves. If people wanted to see wrestling that September night, then they had the chance with WCW Nitro. It was a smart move for sure, even if Eric Bischoff does say it was all a coincidence. Not only could wrestling fans see this new show, but you can bet that the staff from the WWF also tuned in to see what all the fuss was about. WCW's hype of this show on TV was actually quite minimal. The first mention of the new show on television was during a competition spot that aired on the Clash of the Champions 31 show that promoted a Harley Davidson giveaway, with the winner being announced on the first Nitro. Other than that, there wasn't much more televised advertising. WCW did pick up the pace a little on the weekend before the first Nitro, using the tagline "Where the big boys play" at any given opportunity to promote this new WCW program. So what about the location? The landmark first Nitro was held in the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This was another smart move by Eric, with the mall setting making the show look like a jam-packed sellout when, in reality, those fans hanging from the upper floors and around the ring didn't even have to pay for a ticket. WCW wasn't drawing incredibly well at the time, but the mall setting made it look like WCW had drew a huge paying audience here attending this show. It did look different though, and remember, this was really Eric Bischoff's philosophy behind the whole Nitro project, to be different. Okay, so let's look at the entire broadcast and matches. We are first greeted with the classic WCW Monday Nitro opening, the one with the wrestlers being projected on buildings as the streets are set on fire. I always liked this introduction, and it does give a nice feeling of nostalgia every time I see or hear it. We are then presented with some shots of Minneapolis in the Mall of America, and the first thing fans of WCW would have noticed here is that Tony Schiavone isn't greeting us to this new show, but it's Eric Bischoff himself. Eric is going to do play-by-play for the entire evening, and the reasoning Eric Bischoff gave behind this decision was simply that he wanted WCW Nitro to not only look different, but also sound different. Joining Eric here, we have Bobby Heenan and Steve Mongo McMichael. Not a great trio by any means when put together, but Eric Bischoff being on commentary here does mean he had the opportunity to get over whatever storylines or angles that he felt he needed to. Before getting into the televised matches, I'll quickly point out that the first Nitro here actually had a dark match. The American Males defeated Bunkhouse Buck and Dick Slater before the show went on the air. The very first match on the very first Nitro featured Jushin Thunder Liger taking on Flyin Brian Pillman. This wasn't the first time these two met, and this is a trend in the next two matches also. Every match on the first Nitro is a rematch. This Liger vs Pillman match was a little rough around the edges. There's a few mistakes, but still, it does well to showcase what both men were all about. It's an exciting match, and WCW done well to display an underexposed style of wrestling at the time to the Monday night American audience. Pillman gets the win after a roll-up, and if you enjoyed this match, I do recommend that you check out their 20-minute showdown at Super Brawl 2. After we see Sting cut a quick promo on Ric Flair that lasted mere seconds, we are then shown a recording from earlier in the evening featuring Hulk Hogan in his very own Pastamania food establishment. Pastamania wasn't a chain of restaurants. There was only one location where you could get your hands on the Hulkaroni or Hulkaroos, and it was right here in the Mall of America. Pastamania closed its doors after around only a year in business, and even these TV promotions couldn't help save it. All that now remains is this stolen awning of Pastamania, put up at this rundown building as the original Pastamania location was converted to a much safer franchise, a McDonald's. Anyway, back to Hulk here at the first Nitro, and this is pretty rough. Hulk Hogan announces that he will defend the WCW Championship in the main event against Big Bubba Rogers while promoting the joys of Pastamania at the same time. Hulk Hogan says here, "Tonight, brother, for the very first time on TNT, I'm putting my WCW title on the line. And with Pastamania running through my brain, who's going to beat Big Bubba tonight, Hulkamaniacs? And when I'm done dragging him through the Mall of America, I'm going to give Big Bubba a dose of my Hulkaroos, and then I'll body slam him again." So we finally get away from the Pastamaniacs and we are ready for our next match. We have Ric Flair versus Sting. While this isn't their best match together, it means a lot with the knowledge we now have regarding the demise of WCW Nitro. As discussed on my last ever WCW Nitro video, Ric Flair and Sting had a match here on the first Nitro and also on the last Nitro, so the weight of this match becomes much heavier as the years went on. Ric Flair looks great here, and the crowd gives the US champion Sting a great welcome as he makes his way to the ring. Just before the bell sounds though, we get a very important moment that this first Nitro is probably best known for. Lex Luger shows up. Remember how Eric Bischoff said he wanted Nitro to be different from Raw? Another key element in Eric's philosophy was that surprises and the feeling of anything can happen was important to the success of Nitro. Lex Luger showing up here, unannounced, was Eric putting his philosophy in motion. Of course, we all know that this wasn't the first time a wrestler had showed up to a show unannounced, but generally these big surprises were kept for pay-per-views or Clash of the Champions TV specials. Eric Bischoff said, Lex Luger's contract was coming up at the WWE. Now, I've never been a friend of Lex Luger, both on a personal level and a business level. Sting was a close friend of Luger, and he came to me and asked if I would give Luger a chance. I called Lex and said to him he needs to keep this quiet, because if word gets back to WWE that you're talking to me, then you're going to ruin your chances there too. So I offered him $100,000, thinking he is going to turn me down, and so at least I can tell Sting that I tried. And to my surprise, he took the deal. As we got closer and closer to the debut of Nitro, Lex came to me and said his contract is up on Sunday. A light bulb went off in my head and I thought that if we can keep this quiet and literally have Lex walk out on Nitro without anyone knowing about it, that move would set the tone for Nitro. The tone was indeed set. This caused a lot of buzz, especially with the WWF fans who tuned into Nitro that Monday night and saw the former WWF star make this entrance. Lex only stays for a few moments, he disappears again once the Sting vs Flair match gets underway. The end of the match sees Arn Anderson jump into the ring and attack Flair, and once Flair has been chased off, the cameras go over to the commentary team who are being screamed at by Scott Norton. Scott Norton had previously worked for WCW along with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Norton also made an appearance at a WWF house show in 1994, but here he was on the very first Nitro. Randy Savage gets in Norton's face, challenging him to get in the ring. The match doesn't happen though, Norton just stays outside the ring, screaming at Savage. Next we are shown a hype video for Sabu, a superstar who would make his Nitro debut the following week. The WCW production team decided to put these weird tracer-like filters all over the video clips, which makes it difficult on the eyes, but still pretty cool that Sabu was sort of featured on the very first Nitro. Back in the ring and we are shown Mean Gene Okerlund announcing the winner of the Harley Davidson competition. Eric Bischoff then promotes the next WCW Saturday Night Show in Fall Brawl 95 before we are shown a backstage clip of another returning WCW superstar. This time it's Mike Rotunda, who will be now known as Michael Wall Street, a clear play on his IRS character portrayed in the WWF. Many people forget that Rotunda made his return to WCW here on the first Nitro. The whole Lex Luger thing kind of overshadows it, but there you go. Next up is the main event, Big Bubba Rogers taking on Hulk Hogan for the WCW Championship. Hogan is over here. Remember, much of this crowd are the general public, and while the hardcore WCW audiences were beginning to turn a little on the Hulkster in late 95, he was still a very recognisable celebrity to people who weren't necessarily wrestling fans. The match isn't too bad. It's definitely the weakest out of the three matches on this broadcast, but it's not bad. It's a pretty typical WCW babyface Hogan match. Hogan gets the win with the big leg drop. The Dungeon of Doom then hit the ring after the match to attack the Hulkster, which leads to Lex Luger coming to the ring to help out Hogan. Luger and Hulk then confront each other as Sting and Randy Savage make their way to the ring to try and ease the tension. We get an interview in the ring with Lex and Hulk. The Hulkster questions why Lex Luger is in WCW, and Luger says that because Hulk is the WCW champion, it makes Hogan the only real champion in the whole world. Lex says he is sick and tired of playing with kids, and that's why he is now in WCW, the land of the big boys, and Lex wants a shot at the WCW championship. Hogan accepts the challenge, announcing that he will put the belt on the line next week on Nitro. We are then shown the commentary team once again as Eric Bischoff promotes the following week's show as Nitro goes off the air. And that's it, the first show is in the bag. From a viewer's perspective, it's hard now to go back and try to recapture the thoughts and feelings surrounding this WCW show. If the idea was to put on a fast-paced, more action-packed hour of wrestling, then I'd say it was mission accomplished. The Lex Luger stuff, along with the Scott Norton return and, to a certain extent, the Wall Street interview, did add elements of surprise. However, these were on varying levels. The matches in the ring were good, nothing mind-blowing, but still, you had a good mix here of high-flying, fast-paced action, along with a traditional WCW battle, and, well, a Hulk Hogan match also. The overall presentation, from the lighting of them all, the opening video, the transitions between matches, the music, the logo, this was all spot on, and it did seem like a real upgrade from WCW's previous television shows. Remember, this aired in September 1995. It's not like the WWF were putting on their most riveting shows at this time, so when you look at episodes of Raw from this era in comparison to this very first Nitro, yeah, I think they done a good job. The first Nitro pulled in a 2.9 TV rating, which was actually a very good number. What's more interesting though is that the WWF was pulling around the same numbers around this same time on Raw, and they would continue to do so in the weeks that followed. What this shows was that there were fans on both sides. There were WCW fans and there were WWF fans. Fans were not necessarily taken away from WWF Monday Night Raw here, although this was the obvious long-term goal, but the WWF fans still stayed with Raw during these first months of the TV ratings battle. This was good for both companies, as not only did WCW get a rating here comparable to Monday Night Raw, but Monday Night Raw also didn't lose any real viewership here during these first few weeks. That, of course, would change the following year as Raw viewers began switching over to Nitro, but it's interesting to see here that both companies really started off with the same momentum when Nitro kicked off. Eric Bischoff said, "The initial broadcast of Nitro, from a ratings point of view, was considered across the board as a pretty good success. We put out a pretty good product while pulling a few surprises out of our hat. It looked different, it felt live, we made a lot of news and there was a big buzz surrounding the show. I strongly suspected we would be able to build on that success." WCW got its real identity the following week when the classic stage and entranceway made its debut. The Monday Night Wars was now on as WCW Nitro took on WWF Raw for the very first time, and during this very broadcast, only the second episode of Nitro and the first to compete with Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff gave away the result of the WWF Raw main event. Shawn Michaels defeated Sid on Raw, and Eric Bischoff made the announcement on Nitro during Sting's entrance. This is a trend that would continue for weeks, showing that Eric Bischoff was hell-bent on making Nitro the #1 wrestling show in the world, and for a time, he did just that.